Hey everybody, so welcome to this week's episode of the podcast. This is going to be a little bit different than normal because as you can tell, I still probably don't sound normal. I've just gotten my voice back and missed last week because I was sick as a dog with the flu and strep throat. And
herpes.
Stayed relatively sick until about the middle of this week and realized that I do not want to miss 2 weeks of my podcast. So Reckless Threat is on the road this weekend in Kentucky. We just played last night in Louisville at Never Say Die Bar, and right now we're heading to Bowling Green, or actually, where is it? What town? Glasgow, Kentucky, to play at Drink and Dive with Mongo and Semper Vivi. So I figured we would just do a fun little in the car driving to Glasgow, Kentucky podcast with Forrest and Dillon and I. Say hi, Forrest.
Hey, what's up?
Hi, Dillon.
Internet. Hi.
So we're just going to do a little Reckless Threat, whatever, fuck around for 30 minutes podcast. So yeah, welcome to episode 6 of the Coffin Records Oh Hell Yeah podcast. Car crash, yeah. Oh hell yeah. All right, let's get into it. Introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you, Forrest.
Forrest motherfucking McCorkle. And I'll play bass. I don't have 2 functioning eyes. I play bass in Reckless Threat. And yeah, I love punk rock and playing punk rock and fucking playing shows. And we're gonna play a show tonight, and it's gonna be a show.
It's gonna be a show.
It's gonna be a show. There's gonna be bands that play. We're gonna be one of the bands that play, and we're gonna play music, just like we always do, you know.
All right, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you.
I'm Dillon. I do things in this band. If you listen and watch us, then you'll know what I do. There you go.
There's more to you than that.
Yeah.
No.
Tell us about your recent transition.
Into what?
Transition from size.
What do you mean from what?
From Sizemore to full blown alien.
Oh, well, that happened long ago.
Show us your alien bark.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, so
Dillon has a hard outer shell that's hard to crack, but you know, once you get to know him, he's still an asshole. You know? That's what I've heard.
So
Those are the reviews.
first things first, can I turn on some airflow in here? It's hotter than Devil's asshole.
Ask Derek from Semper Vivi.
But you're gonna have to pay for the gas that
Oh.
consumed by turning on the air conditioner.
All right, so a little bit about what we've got going on here in the future. Reckless Threat has we've got about
Shows.
about 10 or 12 new songs written.
5, 6.
Yeah, it's not that many, but who cares? We got new songs, and it's all good shit. It's all gonna be really fucking awesome.
So we're going to be Reckless Threat's going to be working on a new EP or album. We're not really sure yet. Here in the next couple months. So Forrest, what would you say was your gateway into punk rock music?
It was like Metallica, I suppose. It was like the first time I remember like hearing rock music and being like, wow, I really fucking love this. And so, you know, of course, that was like 1992 or 93 or whatever, so it was like the Black Album, and I was like, oh, this is cool. And then I listened to, I started digging into their older shit and discovered Kill 'Em All, and I was like, wow, this is way fucking better than the Black Album. Like, I love how fast it was. And then I discovered the Garage Days EP and the Misfits, and fell in love with the Misfits. And kind of during the same time, I've always had a really great relationship with my older sister, and I was talking to her about the Misfits, and she's like, oh yeah, the Misfits are cool and whatever, but like, have you ever heard of the Circle Jerks, Dead Kennedys, and all this stuff? And she's, you know, like I said, a couple of years older than me, so so she actually like went to see the Circle Jerks and Black Flag when they came to Knoxville. So like she was like an OG punk rocker, and she like, you know, introduced me to those bands, and that's just kind of where it went from there. It's just like I fell in love with the Dead Kennedys and the Circle Jerks and Black Flag and all that stuff. And then I just kind of like started to meet some people in Knoxville that were also into the same kind of music, and they introduced me to more and more bands, and yeah, and that's kind of how it went.
So, being a person who grew up, because I don't have this experience, because like I've said in this podcast plenty of times before, I'm not from Knoxville. So, being a person who is actually from Knoxville, born and raised in the city of Knoxville, can you explain to us the differences of what it was like being a kid in the 90s Knoxville punk rock scene to what it is now, and the Knoxville punk rock scene, say, for the last decade?
Well, it's, I mean, like, without getting into specific details, I guess the main differences would be that, like, back when I was first getting into the scene, like, we had like our club, which was the Mercury Theater, and everybody loved that place and loved going there. It was very like all ages friendly. It wasn't like, we would have shows like in the middle of the afternoon on the weekends, and kids could come out and have a good time, and it wasn't as much of like a bar scene as it is now. So it was just a lot more like kid friendly back then.
So, do you think, in your opinion, was the scene, obviously it was a different type of community, because like you said, you had your all ages scene was a little bit more prevalent than now.
Yeah.
Would you say that there were more bands at the time than we have now in the Knoxville scene, or would you say that it was just like right now we have a lot of the same people in a bunch of different bands? Kind of, it seems like everybody's kind of collinating to create a bunch of bands. So we do have a solid scene, but a lot of us are in multiple bands to fill out the bands. Was it like that in the 90s, or were there more people playing music?
I don't remember any bands where there was cross-pollination of members. Like, it was like everybody was just kind of in their own band, and like there weren't like people like Chris and Dillon and, well, all of us now that are in multiple bands. But it was all just kind of like single unit bands, and everybody like there was like, people definitely had their favorite bands, but there weren't like, and some people that were fans of one band would be against fans of another band, but it was a little bit more straightforward back then. Now it's just like, you know, it's kind of weird. It's because everybody's in a band, it seems like, and like people that are in bands like seem to support everybody, with a couple of exceptions. But I don't know. I'm not sure how to answer that.
Well, I'm going to give you time to think on this next question, but I'm going to go to Dillon, but I do want to ask you a question, so you just think on this for a little bit, and I'll come back around to you. But I want you to give me, here when I swing back around to you shortly, I want you to give me your Mount Rushmore of punk rock for you.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to swing back around to Dillon. So Dillon, you like myself, aren't from Knoxville. You've lived in the Knoxville area longer than I have. But what was your what was your entrance into the Knoxville punk scene? Do you have a memory from when you moved from California to Tennessee? You were too young to be into punk rock at that point, right? Or were you already you were already into punk rock in California? So you got exposed. What was your entrance into punk rock in California?
It was mainly just listening to stuff that was like on the radio, what my parents listened to, and then discovering my own shit. And when I went to one of the junior highs I went to, there was a guy who introduced me to bands like Rudimentary Peanut. But I mean, aside from that, it's not like I was able to go to shows. We moved when I was 12 or 13.
So you don't have any any specific band? Is Rudimentary Peanut the specific band that you could say that was your aha moment? This is punk rock, or was it something else?
No, I never really saw it like that. I just liked what I liked. I never really cared about what they considered themselves or what they didn't. I was more just like, do I like how it sounds? I know what they're talking about.
Got you. Do you have a memory of your first music experience in general? Like, because for me, I don't think I've ever told this, but I could tell my first punk experience and my first metal experience, all that stuff. But for me, my first experience of actual music, I remember my first memory, I was 5 years old, and my sisters were listening to the I can't speak, my voice is so fucked up. My sisters were listening to the Def Leppard Hysteria album. It had just come out, and my parents got it for them on vinyl. This was 1985. So I just turned 5 years old, and I remember being like, so this is what music is, because my parents aren't big music people. They've only been to 3 concerts in their whole damn lives. So I wasn't exposed to music until my sisters, and I just remember being like, wow, I don't know what this is, but I really like it. Do you have an experience that you can think of, like, oh, that's the first thing I listened to that made me think, well, music's cool?
I have a couple, I guess. Like, one was I found, I don't remember how young I was, but I was pretty young. I was like, my parents always listened to that stuff until like later on they started listening to other things. But I remember finding my mom's Minor Threat CD. Like, it's probably 4 or 5. Yeah,
That's awesome.
and I found the complete discography.
That's incredible.
So I got into that. I found my dad's like cassettes and CD collection, and one of my fondest memories, I think, that really got me into it is my dad was blasting Recipe for Hate, Bad Religion. Like, he was just blasting the album one day when we were in Arizona. I always remembered that.
That's really awesome. I don't think I listened to Bad Religion or Minor Threat until I was at least 15, so that's
Mike,
awesome.
Your parents, like, what was their musical taste? Like,
Oh yeah, so
I'm not trying to be. I'm just curious.
yeah, my parents. Like I said, my parents have only been to 3 concerts in their life. My dad is a huge Phil Collins and Genesis fan. My mom just doesn't like music in general. She just doesn't have an opinion on it. But my parents, their first concert they ever went to, my dad went to see AC/DC with his friends when he was like in late high school, maybe early college, but I think it was in high school. So my dad saw AC/DC in the 70s. That's pretty cool. Then my parents saw Wings, which is really cool. My parents have seen Wings, and they've seen Yanni, and they've seen what's the other band that kicks ass in this? Oh, Chicago. My parents saw Chicago, and that's fucking cool. I'd like to see Chicago. So my parents saw Chicago in the late 70s and Yanni in the 90s, which that was like somebody from my dad's work had them go to see Yanni with them, and I don't think my dad really likes it, but it was something to do. So yeah, my parents, not big music fans, definitely didn't like, have never been very supportive, not in like a negative way, but they were never super supportive of me doing music as a career.
Here's an interesting question that I would like to ask you guys that I don't think we've ever talked about before. Like, were either of your parents musicians, or did you just like get into it on your own? Like, did you have any like push from your parents or any family members to become musicians, or was it just something that you came upon naturally?
You answer first, Dylan.
Quick answer is no and yes. My dad evidently played bass for a band in like the 80s at some point, but they only did like a show from what I know, but I can't find any proof. I'd love to, but I don't even know the name.
So that's, for me, that's a big no. Like I said, my parents have no interest in music, never have. My sisters, I don't come from a family of musicians at all. My gateway into music was my cousin Travis. He's like, probably 5 years older than I am. When he was 12 or 13, and I was 7 or 8. It was 1987. I went to see Metallica Master of Puppets tour, or Ride the Lightning tour. Yeah, Ride the Lightning tour. So I was like a 7-year-old kid. My Aunt Kathy took me and my cousin Travis. my experience, what got me into metal and what eventually got me into punk was my cousin Travis. He wasn't a musician by any means, but the reason that I got into music is I grew up in this neighborhood in Hurricane called Western Hills, and in that neighborhood, one of my best friends from my childhood was this kid named J.D. Dilly. He was 2 years older than her. He is 2 years older than me. So at the time when we moved to Western Hills in '85, I was 5. He moved in around '87, so he would have been 9 and I would have been 7. And he was already a 9-year-old virtuoso, ripper, shredder, guitar player. So I was just like, fuck it, man. I loved metal. I listened to Megadeth, Slayer, Metallica, and all these bands with JD. We'd go to his house and let off firecrackers and steal cigarettes from fucking Super America gas station and sit in his garage and smoke cigarettes and love fireworks, and he'd play guitar and I would beat around on pots and pans, and I just always knew I wanted to be a drummer. He tried to teach me guitar, and I tried to play guitar for 10 years and never learned. But if it wasn't for JD, I probably never would have wanted to be in a band. But because I looked up to him, and he was in a death metal band, and they were good, and that was definitely neighborhood kids are the reason that I got into music. Not that I got into music, but that I got into playing music, and just those kids that I looked up to are the reason that I ever had the want to play in a band. So yeah, if it wasn't for the neighborhood kids, I would have never been in a band, because my family did not support, cater to a career or lifestyle in the music industry.
Did your parents come to see you play the first time, like you had a concert, like when you're like a whole teenage piece of shit playing in a band? Did they come to your first show?
My parents didn't come to my first show. My first show ever was actually pretty badass. We had 150 people there and sold all this, bought 80 t-shirts, sold them all. Thought that was the way this was going to go, and we were just going to be, rocket ship up our ass. And then the next 10 shows, I think we sold 10 shirts and 10 shows. But that first show they didn't come to, the second show they didn't come to, and then the third show I ever played, my mom and dad both came to, and then the fifth show I ever played, my mom and dad both came to. My dad hasn't seen me since, so my dad hasn't seen me play in 22 years, and my mom hasn't seen me play since 2005. So my mom has seen me play 5 times. My dad's seen me play 3 times. But again, just not this. I love my parents. This is not me shitting on my parents, but not supportive to my music lifestyle by any means.
Oh yeah, one of my parents has gone to several of my shows. The other one did come to my first show, and I was just kind of rolling my eyes, why are you here? Just I was embarrassed that they were even there. But looking back on it now, I'm just wow, I'm glad that they were around to see that.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate, my parents do watch our shit on YouTube. I don't know that they watch this podcast, but my parents they've seen the Paradise Inn video. My mom complimented that it was really good. She even told me to tell whoever made it, so I texted Rev and I told him that my mom really liked the video. And so my parents watch our stuff. They watched, before you were in the band for us, we did an interview at the Open Court, and my parents, I didn't even ask them to, they found it on YouTube and watched it, and they were like, well, we really like that, but why does the singer have to have a mohawk? He looks like a douchebag, which he was a douchebag, so there's that.
Oh.
But yeah, so they've gone out of their way to watch stuff. It's just my parents are not big on going out, so that was the big caveat for us. I think my parents would have come to a bunch of shows, but they don't like leaving the house unless it's to go to Cracker Barrel or church. Dillon, what about you? Did your parents ever see you play?
Yeah, my dad's seen me play numerous times. Mom never got to see me.
I know that your stepdad saw Cortisol quite a few times, right? Or I don't know what you call. Is he not your stepdad? The guy that I met at the Cortisol show?
No, that's my dad.
That's your dad?
Yeah.
So the Arizona, the bio dad, has he seen you play?
No, not a show or anything.
Okay. So do you have an answer? I know I only asked Forrest, but I meant it for both you guys. Do you have a response to the punk rock what's it? Mount Rush? I can't even think of the words. Do you have a Mount Rushmore of punk rock response, Dillon?
So what's that, only 4?
Yeah, it's 4.
It's also
don't you give me your Mount Rushmore music in general? I know Rush is going to be on there.
I don't know. That's pretty difficult. Can I put so Bad Religion? Can I put Motown as one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's just such a blanket. So the Funk Brothers, I guess, because they did all the music for Motown. I don't know. There's too many. The bands that really got me into it was Bad Religion, Soundgarden, Red Hot Chili Peppers, which I know a lot of people are completely conflicted with that answer. But my dad and my mom really love them, so.
The Mother's Milk record is perfect.
I remember listening to that when I was 2.
I don't love Red Hot, but the Mother's Milk record's perfect. And
Blood Sugar Sex Magic was the one
Blood
that did
Sugar
it for me, I think, because that came out when I was born.
Blood Sugar Sex Magic is I like Blood Sugar Sex Magic, One Hot Minute, and Mother's Milk, and then everything else they've lost me on. That Californication record is dog shit.
But as far as strictly what most people consider punk bands would be Bad Religion, old AFI, which any AFI I like.
Yeah.
Very Proud of It is probably
Hell yeah.
one of my favorites. That really got me into it. I don't know, because I came around at a different time, I guess. I was after you guys, so we had a bunch more other bands that people were calling punk bands that you guys probably may not consider. Because I really like Aiden.
Yeah.
I wouldn't consider them a punk band. They just a emo, screamo band.
I mean, underground, punk adjacent.
Descendants and All were big for me. Also,
what about?
There's too many.
I feel like this is an easier one for you to answer. Give me your Mount Rushmore of alternative, of grunge. That's so easy.
Why don't you just say rock?
Yeah, just Soundgarden, more fucking Soundgarden.
Soundgarden.
I'm giving my. This is so easy for me. Fucking Mount Rushmore grunge. Nirvana, Soundgarden, Stone Temple Pilots, Mother Love Bone, done. Sell it.
What about Fecal Matter?
I've never heard that band. Is that a band?
Yeah, that's what Kurt Cobain was doing before.
Oh.
Nirvana.
Well, I like Nirvana, but I don't get into
demo tape. It sounds like Fecal Matter.
Does it sound like
Yeah, it's very fitting.
burn? I cut you off a second ago, though. You were saying Descendants, and then I cut you off because I had all. Yeah.
Not the same band, regardless of whatever people try to say.
I love the Mount Rushmore question because
Big Drill Car's really cool in that same vein.
when you ask people the Mount Rushmore question, you either get people giving you four things and it's easy, or you get people that are like, I don't know, I can't really think of any, and then they name 20 bands like you just did, which is fun. I like it. Forrest, do you have? I feel like you're going to give a more concise.
A more concise. I don't know about more concise, because I'm gonna mix this up between individuals and bands.
Okay.
So the number one, which I've been asked this question before, and the answer remains the same. Number one is Cliff fucking Burton from Metallica. To me, that guy is first of all, Metallica was a fucking punk band when he was in the band. Second of all, his musicianship on those first 3 Metallica albums is my favorite thing in the world. I love listening to those bass lines that he came up with Metallica. So as a bassist, for me, he is first and foremost number 1 on the Mount Rushmore. Other than that, Bad Religion, Greg Graffin, his lyric writing is to me the epitome of what great punk rock lyrics should be. So put Greg Graffin / Bad Religion number 2. Dead Kennedys are also another band that I would put on my Mount Rushmore. I just think that when I think of punk rock, that is kind of the first band that pops into my head, just for their lyrics, their political statement on what was going on back in the 80s at the height of punk rock. You can't fucking top Dead Kennedys.
Is that 4?
I think that's 3.
It's 3.
Cliff Burton / Metallica, Greg Graffin / Bad Religion, Dead Kennedys. 4, I don't know. That's just like there's so many other like bands I would put in that list. I'm not gonna name any specific one.
Descendants.
If you want me to, I'll like just spout off a bunch of my favorite bands, but
do it.
Okay. Vindictives, Grimple, Corrupted Peasant Farmers. These are bands that like not many people know, but for me, they were hugely influential, and I love them, and I love their music, and I probably would have become disinterested in punk rock if it wasn't for those types of bands.
Nice.
So, real quick, this is for Brian from Scrooge Mandela.
Listen to
Listen
FYP,
to RKL,
Brian.
you fuck. Not
And-
no effects.
And FYP.
RKL did it first. Remember that.
So I'm actually really good at this answer because I've thought about it a lot. So my Mount Rushmore of punk rock is easy for me because I can give you experiences for why. So what got me into punk rock is the Metallica Garage Days record, and basically what got me to obviously got me to realize that the Misfits were a band. So for me, the Mount Rushmore, and this isn't even my favorite, the Misfits aren't in my top 10 favorite punk bands, but for me, just the Mount Rushmore of punk on like for what got me into punk and the reason that I'm into punk rock music is Misfits for what actually made me a fan of the genre, and then what made me a fan of because like I like the Misfits, and I still was a big metalhead, and the Misfits were, I knew that it was a punk band, it was not a metal band, and I listened to them pretty solid for like 5 years, and then I was a sophomore in high school, and a girl in my art class handed me a copy of NoFX Heavy Petting Zoo and said, listen to this, there's more to punk rock than just the Misfits. So I literally didn't listen to anything other than metal, fucking thrash metal, and the Misfits for 5 years until, you know, this girl, Kim Cole, handed me Punk and Drublic, and that was so NoFX is my second.
NoFX is for sure like one of the best punk bands of all time, and they were also like one of the first new bands that I got into back in the early 90s.
Yeah.
And
RKL first.
I know, like I don't know how I didn't know about RKL back then, but they just were not.
It's very underrated.
Yeah, they were just not a well-known band back when they existed.
But also some other bands to listen to that are really good. Citizen, Basement, Title Fight, Tiger Strong. You're welcome.
And No Pressure. Yeah, that's a good question. Like, list new bands.
That's another question you should ask, Mike. Is like, what are some bands that people might not be aware of?
And those are 4, 5 that I.
So let me finish my Mount Rushmore. So NoFX is the second on my Mount Rushmore because that's what got me into the whole genre of punk rock, not just the Misfits. And then after that, what got me into ska punk, and I'm a huge Op Ivy fan. I've put out an Op Ivy tribute compilation, so obviously I'm a huge Op Ivy fan. But actually what got me into ska punk and what made me a huge ska fan, and for like a solid 3 years of my life, all I listened to was ska and ska punk and stopped listening to metal in general, was the Suicide Machines. They're still one of my favorite bands to this day. So they're the third in my Mount Rushmore. And the fourth in my Mount Rushmore is because they're a hardcore band, but they're the band that I toured with the most, and the band that I've played with the most on the road that were really inspirational to me and my playing and just my musicianship is Comeback Kid. I consider them, I think they're a hardcore band through and through, but I'm going to put them on my Mount Rushmore punk rock because those dudes are a super fucking punk rock band. They've got melody, and they're not all chug, but that band really inspired my playing, and basically everything that I did from the age of like 23 to 28 was all revolved around Comeback Kids music, and getting to play shows with those guys, and that's they're the fourth on my Mount Rushmore. And it's weird because that's, for me, it's not about who my favorite bands are. It's about who, broadened my musical landscape, and that for me was, I'd never been in a metal or a hardcore band, and when I was joining one, I was told I really needed to listen to, like Dana from Home Coffee told me, he's like, you really need to listen to these 5 bands. And it was, I'd already been a Comeback Kid fan, but it was like, you need to listen to Civ, you need to listen to Gorilla Biscuits, you need to listen to the Bouncing Souls, you need to listen to Avail, and you need to listen to this band called Most Precious Blood, which is a very metallic hardcore band. But he was very adamant that I listen to these 5 bands before I prepare to be in that band, because at the time I was more so like a pop punk kid and was in a pop punk emo band myself for years leading up to being in my first heavy band. So that was kind of what brightened my horizons on melodic hardcore. So Dillon, can you think of a couple bands off the top of your head that are new, and by new I mean haven't been around for more than a decade, that people might know about, like underground bands that deserve some accolades?
And the Over Our Eyes band, where they from? They're from
Baltimore.
They were really good, actually. I'd like to see them again.
Yeah, we'll be playing with them a few times this summer.
From my understanding, they're pretty new, right? Like they've only been around
5 years.
5.
Yeah.
Are they like a super group? Did he mention they were in other bands? Or
yeah, I think they were kind of like, they're kind of like lifers of the Baltimore punk scene.
Yeah, they were pretty good. If we're talking about like lesser known bands.
Can you think of bands like whose albums you own right now that, like you mentioned, I mean, Title Fight are a pretty popular band, but
yeah, but they were around.
But Citizen's not a super popular band. They're pretty underground.
Citizen changed a lot for me, but musically, without being like a punk band. Basement, really fucking good. Title Fight.
Yeah.
Tiger's Jaw's they're really good if you want something that's not as like loud, more melodic. Couple bands that I'm pretty big on right now, like definitely the 4 most recent, like bands that have been around for less than 5 years that I'm really hot on right now would be a hardcore band from Baltimore called End It, and then Scowl from California. They're getting really big. They've toured with Limp Bizkit and Fiddlehead's cool. Yeah, Fiddlehead's cool. Those are dudes from Title Fight, right? Basement. Okay. I'm really big on No Pressure, which is the singer from, you know who it is, Dillon. I'm forgetting their name right now. No Pressure is the singer from The Story So Far. Yeah, No Pressure is the new band that the singer for The Story So Far started as a side project, and I like The Story So Far, but No Pressure is a million fucking times better in my opinion. I'm really big on a hardcore... That's his name.
Parker, yeah. I'm really big on a hardcore band from Louisville called Inclination. And the other band that, unfortunately, they broke up, which really sucks, but a band that we've played with a few times that I guess are done, I don't think they're going to do anything anymore, is a band from up around Fredericksburg, Richmond area called, I can't remember what they're called now. They're a really good skate punk band we played with at Fredericksburg, Dillon. Shit.
It's not, I don't know. It reminds me of Celebration Summers.
Yeah, I was getting ready to mention them. Celebration Summer is a band that's from the DC area that are fucking killer. We played with them a couple times, and those guys are amazing. They've recently put out a record on AF Records, which is owned by some of the dudes from Anti-Flag, or I guess it's like owned by a friend of the guys from Anti-Flag, and Anti-Flag has done releases on that label. But Celebration Summer are great. Their record rules. It should blow up because it's fucking incredible. Personal Crisis, the band I was talking about. So, skate punk band from up around Morgantown, West Virginia, and like the Fredericksburg, Virginia area. They put out a record on Allegedly Records last year, and I put it in my top 10. But I guess soon after the record came out, they broke up, which really fucking sucks. But their drummer, Mikey Golis, is killer. I think he's in another band now called GTI that Reckless Threat played with. I think they're called GTI. Is that right, Dillon?
I
Yeah. But Personal Crisis, that record is rad. I think it's called Wasted Time or Wasted Days or something, but it's fucking awesome. Forrest, what are a couple hot bands that are new to you?
I mean, I'm just gonna name bands that I've seen live because I don't really like seek out recorded music. Second Self, I think, is killer. Scrooge Mandela, awesome. Billy Bats and Made Men.
Yeah.
I mean, these are just bands that we're friends with and I've seen live and I respect and love. I don't really spend a lot of time like I should, like researching new bands. So I don't really have much to say on that.
I personally think that it's kind of like a running joke in the punk rock community, I think. But you always hear people say punk is dead, and punk died with the Ramones, or everybody's got their opinion about when punk died. But in my genuine opinion, punk's not dead. It's never going to die. And 3 bands that I can name right now that are absurdly amazing, that will obviously not let punk die because they're too fucking good, are Billy Bats and the Made Men, Scrooge Mandela, and Orphan Riot. Youthful bands that have a solid, if they keep at it, have a solid 20 or 30 more years, they can be kicking ass. I mean, yeah, fucking Billy Bats and the Made Men are probably the youngest of those 3 groups. But Orphan Riot guys, young guys, Billy Bats, young guys, Scrooge Mandela, mostly young guys, and even like we talked about, the oldest member of Scrooge Mandela still seems like a 20-year-old at heart. So they're the future of punk rock is alive and well with some bands that we have had the pleasure of becoming friends with.
Yeah, it's weird because, like, you know, we don't know what the scene is like in, like, outside of the Southeast, right?
Yeah.
Like, we just named a bunch of bands that are, you know, Kentucky, Tennessee,
North Carolina,
Georgia,
yeah.
North Carolina, you know, Southeast. Like, I don't know what the scene is like out in California right now. Like, when I was a kid, I knew, like, all the bands that I knew of were California bands and Chicago bands. Now, it's completely shifted to where, like, all the new bands that I know of are from this region. Like, the bands from Chicago are not coming down to play in Knoxville anymore. And the bands from out west are typically not coming down to play in Knoxville anymore. So we don't get the opportunity to see a lot of these young, and, you know, I'm sure there's some great bands out there from those regions that are just not coming to our area of the country at this time.
Yeah, I mean, if you mention Chicago, I can mention an up-and-coming band from Chicago, actually, that Cortisol, Dillon and I's old band Cortisol with Owen, it was basically Owen's band that Dillon and I ran. But Cortisol played a show in Chicago. I mean, I really miss our friends. God damn, now I'm so bad with names. What were the Chicago band that we were friends with, Dillon?
I'm even worse with names.
Look at this dumb son of a bitch almost getting run off the fucking
Also,
road.
I figured out Mount Rushmore. I don't know how. I forgot the name, the fucking name. Face to Face.
Oh, yeah.
And no, I can't remember the name of that band right now. I know we talked about that. We played this space.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a few bands from Chicago that are on the up and up right now that are also kind of youthful in their mid-20s.
Back in the 90s, there were so many Chicago bands. Like, there was Sludgeworth, Oblivion, The Fighters, Vindictives, Screeching Weasel. There's just so many fucking bands from that area, and they all would come down to Knoxville. Not all of them, but a lot of them would come down to Knoxville and play. Boll Weevils, 88 Fingers Louie, like, all those fucking bands, like, came down, played Knoxville, and they were some of the most memorable shows from my, early days as a punk rocker. I don't know what's going on in Chicago now, but hopefully there's still a healthy scene there. Just not traveling.
Yeah. So sorry, this has been all over the place. I'm holding this with like a selfie stick type deal. So if you've made it, we're almost 40 minutes in. If you've made it this far in, you're a trooper. But I want to see how many people actually stuck through this podcast and watched this far in. So I'm going to give a little bit of Reckless Threat trivia real quick here. This is not something that I've shared quite often, but I'm going to share it now because it's funny. We were having a hard time, like all bands do. We were having a hard time deciding on a name at first, and I jokingly pitched the idea, and this was obviously never going to be the name of the band, but the trivia is that before we decided on Reckless Threat, which I will say is, in my opinion, is a terrible fucking name, but before we decided on that name, I pitched the idea of our band being called Ryan Coffee and the Coat Hanger Abortions. So if you've made it 40 minutes into this podcast, you now know that the one band name that I pitched that I thought was really funny was Ryan Coffee and the Coat Hanger Abortions. So last thing before we end this, because it's already getting pretty long, and I'm sure that if you've been watching this, you're probably going to have a headache anyway. Dylan, when I say pro wrestling, what's the first wrestler who's comes to your mind?
Mike, I would never go see a band called Ryan Coffee and the Coat Hanger Abortions.
Good.
First thing that comes to my mind is Porno Arcade and the band Kayfabe.
When I say pro wrestling, it's the first thing. Okay, so and tell people why Porno Arcade comes to your mind.
Because Chad is a wrestler.
And the only pro wrestling you've ever seen live in your life is Chad wrestling twice, right?
Yeah, Chad ended up in the
3 times.
Yeah.
3 times. You've seen Chad wrestle 3 times, yeah.
Yeah, that was the first time.
Well, that's good. That's awesome, though. I mean, that's awesome that when you think of punk rock, you think of one of your friends or when you think of wrestling, you think of one of your friends who's a pro wrestler. That's very, very cool. That's better than, because you obviously, for anybody watching this right now, it doesn't take a very smart person to know that you're not a fan of pro wrestling.
Nope.
So that's pretty cool, though, that people like yourself who aren't a fan of pro wrestling, most of them, their knee-jerk reaction to that question is going to be something like Hulk Hogan or Ric Flair or just somebody who you know because the name's famous.
Mine's UCD.
Or The Rock.
I guess, yeah. Mook is really cool. Spaceman is pretty cool. And then, you have the White Claw Outlaws.
I dig it. Forrest.
Yeah.
When I bring up pro wrestling, what's the first thing you think of?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is memories of going over to my grandfather's house, and he had like this box that he attached to his TV that allowed him to like steal the pay-per-views.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a black box deal. We would go over to my grandfather's house and we watched like the WrestleManias and the SummerSlams and all that stuff in the 90s. I remember, sitting in his living room, seeing The Rock, who was called Rocky Maivia at the time, like his debut match on a pay-per-view, which I thought was weird. I was like, why is this random dude just like getting this big of a push? And,
The Undertaker.
We all understand why. Yeah, like we all understand why now. Like these guys were just like, I guess Vince McMahon or whoever was running the show spotted these guys and was like, okay, well, these guys are going to be superstars, so they're going to get their debut on a pay-per-view. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. More recently, like obviously you guys know, like my brother was involved with the Ricky Morton School, and so I got introduced to that, and of course the White Claw Outlaws. Seen them, and Spaceman, all those guys Dillon mentioned are, in my opinion, like way more entertaining than the stuff that I've seen on the current version of whatever the WWF is now. So I think that there's a lot of parallels between pro wrestling and punk rock or independent music bands. I mean, it's all kind of the same ball of wax, right? Everybody's just trying to like get their name out there and do their thing and entertain people and trying to have fun with it. So I appreciate the indie side of the pro wrestling stuff that's been coming out lately.
I dig it. Well, I appreciate Forrest and Dillon for doing this not so normal version of the Oh Hell Yeah podcast. And I appreciate anyone who tuned in to watch. Sorry for the camera being all over the place like so. But thanks for understanding that this is the best that we could do for this week. And I appreciate everybody for checking this out, for sharing it, for liking, and for following the page, for following the channel. So please continue to do that. We're hoping to every week this grows a little bit, little by little helps. So hoping the channel will continue to grow and we can keep making this podcast and keep uploading cool content. Thanks again for all the support, and I'll be back with a traditional version of the podcast next week. I've got a couple guests lined up. I'm going to have Icky Stardust on here in the next few weeks. Matt from Chupacabra is going to be a guest in the next few weeks, and then some other guests lined up. But until next week, thank you all for checking us out and tuning in. And if you want to support Reckless Threat, all of our links will be in the information below. So thanks again, and woo, that was a big lane change. You guys have a great day, and oh hell yeah.